Okay, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. Badge, Ian, our special guest, Tanner Gary, head coach. I tell you what, it's incredible, Coach. You talk about your family lineage at your school and with your dad and then your grandfather, and now you, the head coach there at Fort Cherry. And, I'm just very interested in hearing a little bit on, when you were out there playing and you played there and had a great career at Fort Cherry. Did you ever think that you'd be in the position that you're in right now?
There was a part of me that always knew that I wanted to be a coach. That was one thing that always was in the back of my mind, is that I did want to coach. With Fort Cherry and my family, there's always been, a large amount of pride there, without a doubt. And it kind of always was, hey, part of me knows that I want to coach. Part of me knows how much I love Fort Cherry and how much that area means to me. This area means to me. So there definitely was a part of me that believed that, at some point that could be part of my path. And with what happened and kind of how it happened, I really don't think it could have really went down any better. I was happy to get out of college and, get my feet in the ground right away with coaching, having an opportunity to go over and coach at South Fayette for 2 years underneath, Joe Rossi, who is, a legendary coach in his own right. And he's just someone that I learned so much from, on top of what I learned from my grandfather and my father. And then, everything you pull from, the great college coaches that you come across as well. So after those 2 years at South Fayette, to have that opportunity kind of present itself, it was perfect. I didn't know, to be honest with you, if I was ready. And even I often think about, Coach Rossi. I had a talk with him before I left South Fayette, and he said, if I'm being honest with you, you're never going to feel like you're ready. But you got to take advantage of opportunities when they show themselves. And it was something that I talked to my family about a lot. It was something I talked to my dad with, especially if it was the right time. And, hey, you never know when the next opportunity is going to show itself. So, we decided to take a shot at it, and, it's worked out.
Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, you guys are on a little bit of a roll here now. Last week, you snapped a 21-game losing streak with the win over Northgate, so congratulations on that. And then this week, you went out and had a massive win over Rochester, who, depending on which paper you look at, was either the number 2, number 3, number 4 ranked team in the WPIAL. So that was a massive win for your program on a little bit of a roll here now. So congratulations, and where do you guys go from here?
It's all week and, all year, I should say, it's definitely been, just teaching the kids that every single week you have to approach it the same way. And it's such a testament to the kids, as you said, coming, off of a 21-game losing streak and still believing in the things that your coaches are telling you. These kids have had every opportunity to just kind of pack it in and say, you know what, nothing's changed. You come back after losing 18 straight, get a new head coach, comes in and tries to start telling you the way you should, be approaching practice, the way you should, focus on the little things. You come out and you lose your first 3 games. I mean, it's easy to start doubting yourself, start doubting your friends, the coaches, everything. But they stayed the course. And, it was no secret whenever we opened the season up, with the way they realigned the schedule, kind of opening up with Burgettstown, which is our, crosstown rival 10 minutes down the road. And that's a team that has just really taken it to us the past 2 years, trying to mentally get a team ready to play that game, first game of the year, whenever you're trying to develop a new culture and a new system and, a whole lot of question marks still on the table. And then to go from there, and go play Shenango with, just a heck of a team, big bodies, mean offensive linemen, and a running back that, is as good as any I've seen. Yeah. And then you leave Shenango and you go play Olsh. And, it was it was hard to talk to the kids and kind of let them know without, deterring them at all and saying like, look, guys, we have a pretty front heavy schedule right now. And, we're in these games. Shenango got away from us a little bit. Burgestown was a 27-22 game with, many opportunities for us to win that game. And then Olsh was, if I'm not mistaken, I think we were down a touchdown at half. We were closing into, within one touchdown. And then, a late touchdown, I think made that one, 2 to 3 touchdown game, but we were always in it. And then you go over to Northgate and, you're preferred to win. And all of a sudden you could tell the kids are starting to believe and understand that, this is why we focus on doing the little things the right way. And this is why we focus on practicing 100%. And, all those things that we preach, you come out, to play Rochester, which, as you mentioned, depending on where you're looking at, it's a number 2, 3, 4 ranked team. One thing that I've always tried to instill in my kids is that at sometimes you're going to be outmanned in terms of athlete size, whatever. One thing Fort Cherry football has always, stood for is hard-nosed football and playing with a chip on your shoulder. And I think that that's something that our kids have bought into. And that's kept us in a lot of those games, is that no matter what, is up against us, we coach our kids to fight until the last drop. And I think that they've really bought into that. And it's what's got us to where we are right now.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially about the athletes, because Rochester's running back Rashawn Reid was coming off a six touchdown game the week before against Olsh. So what did you guys do to kind of prepare for that and try and slow him down?
It's in terms of slowing him down, he's such a natural runner. There's some kids you just watch on film and, you could tell that they're technicians maybe that, focus on every little cut and understanding where the blocks are setting up. And, I feel that he's just a natural football player in the sense that a lot of it comes very naturally to him. He's very fluent, very quick, smooth. And on top of that, you're going up against a Rochester team that, say what you will, they've been doing the same things for, more years than I've been alive.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've expressed to these kids, going into that week, is that, these kids have been running the same play since they were, in youth. They might not be the biggest, they might not be the strongest, they might not be the fastest, but one thing you always get out of a Rochester team is, they're going to be well coached, and that they are going to know their responsibilities and where they need to be on every single play, and they're good at what they do. So we just stress the importance all week of, run fits and, filling gaps, closing down whenever they're trying to kick us out and forcing everything back inside. If they're pitching the ball, we got to force it back in, don't get hooked, don't get sealed. And I'll tell you what, for a team that, to be honest with you, was struggling with run defense. I mean, we have been, to be able to, do what we did against a team like Rochester. I couldn't be more proud of the kids. You could say what you will about, coaching and schematics and things like that, but at the end of the day, the kids got to play. And our kids played their hearts out. They were flying around to the ball no matter where it was. And we just kind of were fortunate enough to make plays in the right times, in order to get that win.
So on a personal note, did you have this Rochester game kind of circled on your schedule? I noticed in your preseason column in the Tribune Review, you specifically mentioned, the 2001 championship game against Rochester. You were excited to be in a conference with Rochester again. Was this one you had circled?
Yeah. So, Rochester, it honestly is funny because I talk to the kids frequently about, Fort Cherry of old and, the way it used to be and, how we play the game, hard nose, smash mouth. Doesn't matter who we're playing. We're going to line up. We're going to hit you. And, it's one thing to talk to the kids about. It's another for them to kind of, take it and run with it. But whenever I talk to them about, Rochester week, it's, hey guys, look, there's a history here, between the 2001 game, which I was a ball boy on the sideline for, whether it's about, whenever I played them in high school, we played them my junior year, we played them my senior year. They got the better of us both those games. Whenever I was in 7th grade, we played them in the playoffs and in the regular season. They got the better of us then. So I hyped it up as a rivalry game when in actuality, I haven't been alive for a Fort Cherry victory against Rochester,
You have
so
now.
that's a game that I wanted. I 110% wanted to be a part of that game. I was excited for it because it's one of those teams that you feel like you're always close to scratching the surface on them. But as I mentioned before, they're good at what they do. They're very good at what they do, and they live by it. And they will run the ball right at you and make you adjust. And then whenever you adjust, they'll pass. And they're good. And it's a team that has so much tradition behind it, just, the same way we look at ourselves at Fort Cherry and what we're trying to reinstill. So to be able to play them again, once it brings back those memories of, Fort Cherry of old and the way things used to be. So to have the kids be a part of that, and not only to be a part of it, but to experience a win, that's a great step for the program.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats to you guys on that. It's an incredible victory for you guys.
Yeah, Coach, this is your first year as a head coach. What is something that may have, that you weren't expecting as being a head coach? I mean, you obviously you said you were groomed at South Fayette. Obviously you grew up on, the lineage there, but is there anything that has surprised you about being a first-year head coach?
Other than a pandemic?
Right.
I wish the first thing that came to my mind is to think of, something positive, which there are positives, but I think that the first thing that came to mind for me, and I'm a straight shooter, I'll tell you the way it is. The one thing that has stood out to me about being a first year head coach is how much of it isn't football. How much of it has to deal with, dealing with the little things behind the scenes that, it's a grind. It is, there's a lot of little things that you got to take care of, whether it's, whether it's boosters or, understanding, when you're allowed to watch film or, be on the field, you're not allowed to practice this time or that time. And, that's stuff that you'll see everywhere. But whenever you're the one calling the shots, you want to make sure that you have, everything in line. And sometimes, you're learning as you go. But at the end of the day, you just want to coach football. And, whether it's you show up to practice and you find out, two of your kids went home because they had, a headache or something like that. Now you got to kind of and, at a school like Fort Cherry, it's tough because you have X amount of kids to be able to work with, and at South Fayette, I think we had 74 kids on our roster. At Fort Cherry, we have 28, so to field a team and then a scout team as well, every single person counts, so, having the ideas whenever I came from South Fayette about how I wanted to run the program and, what steps to take, I had to kind of take a step back and check myself a little bit because we don't have the same things that they have, whether it's the facilities or whether it's the equipment, or, things of that nature. You have to kind of find a way to deal with it and move on and find out, what's best and how can we approach this in the most, influential or kind of, time oriented way. I think that our kids, they are used to it because, they've grown up in it. And I was kind of removed from it because I graduated, went to college, experienced 6 years of college football, and then ended up coaching for 2 years at a 4A school. Then all of a sudden you come back and, you're coaching single A football, which, that's an entire other debate. I've always been someone that will argue, single A football, it's still, great football. You can't tell me that, this kid isn't an athlete because he was born in this area code, but that kid over there is an athlete because he has a bigger area code, so I stand by single A football, but there's definitely more leaps and challenges that you have to go through in order to be successful.
Sure.
Yeah, we're certainly big fans of single A football, and actually our our first guest that we had on a few weeks ago was Avella's head coach. So this is the third episode of this we've done, so we're still kind of new at this, but we're really wanted to try and promote the good stories that people may not hear of very often, that a lot of people, they hear about the big schools because they're the ones that get a lot of publicity, but we want to try and tell those stories that don't get told as often, like your Avella's, your Fort Cherries, and some of the single A programs. I went to high school at North Catholic when they were a single A school, so I have a personal appreciation for the small school programs. Granted, they've grown a little bigger since they moved up north, but nevertheless, it's those small school programs are great to follow, and you get some of the best storylines out of them too.
Yeah, you get great football out of single A football, double A football, wherever it is that you go. It's a matter of who's working and who's the next great. The years that I played, the amount of kids that I could tell you that went on to the next level, and even are playing on Sundays now. I spent 4 years playing against Tyler Boyd when I was in high school.
Sure.
And
absolutely,
that's a kid that would have been successful anywhere he went. I don't care if he was in a Claret and Bears uniform or a Pittsburgh Central Catholic uniform. The kid was going to be successful because he was an athlete. He worked hard, and he knew what he wanted to be, and what he wanted to be was great. And that's what he ended up being.
Yeah. So just one final question before we let you go. With you mentioned the whole pandemic, obviously some big challenges with that, but even with kind of the limited number of fans that have been able to come to games, have you guys felt the support of the community behind your team this year?
Absolutely. It's definitely, as every school in the WPIAL would say right now, it's definitely had its challenges. Part of the challenges that you don't really, hear about as much is just the mental drain that it has on you, where, this school's getting shut down this week, that school's getting shut down this week. You never know when your last game is going to be. And we always try to prepare as we would for any week. But at the same time, there's definitely, everyone has their scares. Sometimes you'll show up to practice and, so-and-so went home because, they had a cough or they had a runny nose, and, now they go into a 14-day quarantine, or they get tested, and, it's a waiting game as to, man, are we going to be the next school that gets shut down? So it's a mentally challenging, process to be going through right now, on top of everything that, comes with being a head coach and being a part of a coaching staff. So the pandemic itself has, definitely set its boundaries on us, because my main goal whenever I got hired is I wanted to bring back that pride that we were talking about, that, Fort Cherry had for so many years. And a lot of people were very excited, whenever, we got up there and we started working with the kids. We tried every way we could through social media to make sure that we were keeping the community involved in what we were doing. And, people were excited. And, it seems like every single week, and this is a good thing, but every single week, every single one of our coaching staff, members, the kids, they're getting texts from people all over saying, is there a ticket that I can get to the game? Is there a ticket? What is there a new guideline that'll let us in? Like, will they let people stand by the fence? So people want to be there. They are supporting us in every way they can, whether it's through live streams. A lot of the local restaurants and bars have, the videos playing, in the restaurants or the bars, just trying to get people together. If they can't be there, they still want to find ways to support. So it's been great.
That's great. That's great to hear. Congratulations on your success, and best wishes in the future. You've got a couple games against some, I'll call them middle of the pack teams here in Union and Cornell to close out the season. So, hopefully you can keep stacking those wins together.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me.
Thanks, Tanner.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Coach.
All right. Take care now. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Yep.
All righty. Bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, what a great story there, Ian. I got to give you a lot of credit. I mean, with the guests that you brought forward here, all great stories, especially the fact that his grandfather, the field's named after his grandfather, his dad coached there, now he's coaching there. That's really cool. I'd like to. I got to believe that's the only story like that. Forget about Pennsylvania, in the country, maybe, as far as for high school football. What do you think?
Quite possibly, yeah. And Fort Cherry is a school that, I mean, he talked about they've had some strong tradition there. Marvin Lewis, who was the coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, went there in the 1970s.
Wow.
They called it the snake pit defense back in the day because they shut out 6 of their 9 opponents, and Marvin Lewis was on that 1974 team that did that. So they've had some historical success there, and obviously he has the lineage of, you know, having the last name that's kind of ingrained in Fort Cherry football of, like you said, is the stadium's named for his grandfather, who was a coach there for a long time. His father coached there forever. And now hopefully Tanner Gary is able to be there for a long time as well, because he definitely seems like a guy who wants to take the program in the right direction. And he inherited a tough situation, like he talked about. They've
Inherited
lost
is the good word.
Yeah, well, but you know, they've lost 18 in a row, and you know, but he's got them back on the winning track now, and they've got a chance to close out this season on a 4-game winning streak. If you look at the schedule ahead of them and what they've done the last 2 weeks, they could easily actually finish this season with a winning record at 4-3 if they win their next 2 games.
Well, that's good. And look, I know we'll jump around here a little bit, but you know, Coach touched on, you know, this whole COVID thing out there and the WPIAL. I saw your tweet a little bit earlier this evening about the teams that were looking for games this week because of the COVID. And I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll say it's mostly because of COVID. Hempfield canceled on Central Catholic. Blackhawk was scheduled to play Newcastle, and Newcastle had canceled their game last week against Beaver, so they're also out this week because they're on a 2-week quarantine. Apollo Ridge's opponent, Sarah Catholic, also is under a 2-week quarantine, and that was actually going to be a huge game between the two of them. Because they're the only undefeated teams left in the Allegheny Conference. So that's was going to be for first place in the conference there in 2A, but they're not going to play this week, and Sarah's probably not going to play next week. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the WPIAL decides the playoff teams, and if Sarah Catholic, who would have missed their last 2 weeks of the season, potentially gets in because they're still undefeated. But they would have missed their last 2 weeks, and there's probably going to be a question mark of whether or not Sarah can get back on the field, because I think they had a lot of cases. Like the most I'd seen, it was like 14 positive cases that Sarah Catholic came out between, you know, and that's not just, I'll say that's not just football players, that's school wide. So that can be parents, that can be, or not parents, sorry, but that can be teachers, that can be students, that can be athletes.
Yeah, right.
Just got reported as total cases. Some of the other ones were not COVID related that were on my list. So in that same Allegheny Conference in 2A, Summit Academy had just opted out of the whole season. So the teams that they had been scheduled to play all suddenly got bye weeks.
Why did they opt out?
Well, Summit Academy is kind of a unique situation. They're a school for adjudicated youth.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
so I remember that now. Okay.
Yeah, they get complete roster turnover every year, and I think it was just easier for them to say we're not going to play.
Arrivederci, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Ligonier Valley was scheduled to play Summit this week, so that game was off. So Ligonier Valley has an open date. Waynesburg also has an open date. I don't remember what their situation was. Why? I don't think it was COVID related though. And then Uniontown, who now has the longest losing streak in the state at 34 games, because York County Tech won a few weeks ago, that Uniontown now has the longest losing streak. They had originally opted out of the whole season, but then they decided they were going to play, but only play a limited schedule. So they're only playing a handful of games. So they had canceled their game against West Mifflin, and Uniontown is really not good at all. They were a
team. Correct me if I'm wrong. They basically weren't going to play, and now they are playing, but now they're not playing.
Yeah, they kind of decided to sort of pick and choose which games on their schedule they were going to play. So West Mifflin's a pretty good program, and Uniontown kind of just decided they're too good for us right now. We're not going to play them. So both West Mifflin and Uniontown kind of have open dates on the schedule. I'd really like to see Uniontown and Waynesburg schedule a game against each other, because I mentioned Uniontown's losing streak, but Waynesburg's lost like 12 or 13 in a row here. And Waynesburg's a 2A program, and even though Uniontown's a 4A program, like, to be honest with you, they kind of look like an 8th grade team out there against Ringgold. The last game they played, like, they were not good at all. They got killed by a Ringgold team that had won one of their last 23 games. So, like, they weren't even close to competing with the sort of bottom tier 4A teams.
Right. And
Uniontown actually just got moved back up into 4A, which is even worse. Like, they were in 3A for 2 years and lost all their games, and then got moved back up to 4A. So it was an even tougher schedule for them. So I'm expecting, probably if everything gets back to normal next year, Uniontown might just opt out of the WPIAL altogether, like Albert Gallatin did a few years ago, and try and play an independent schedule and just try and get some more kids out for the program, schedule some out of state teams that they might be better matched up against from a roster size standpoint, and just try and get some wins and try and build some momentum around the program, which is something that Albert Gallatin out there in the southern part of Fayette County has seen. They had won, I think, 6 games in like 9 years in the decade before they had opted out of the WPIAL, and then they won 5 games in their last season. So on the last decade, Albert Gallatin won 11 games, but 5 of those came playing that independent schedule. And then all of a sudden they started to have more kids come out for the team this year. They had some positivity around the program because they had won some games. So sometimes, unfortunately, that's what it takes. But the other side of that is Butler, who had lost, I think, 20 some in a row.
Right.
They opted out of the WPIAL to play in District 10. And then their schedule in District 10 got loaded with all the big schools up there. So now they're playing against Erie McDowell and Cathedral Prep, and they're getting killed by those teams. So it's not always a silver bullet for your program to opt out of the WPIAL schedule, even if it's a situation where you're getting killed every week. But for Butler's kind of the bad example, Albert Gallatin's kind of the good example. So somewhere in between, but I was glad for those Uniontown kids that they actually got to play this year, because that senior class hadn't won a game their whole high school career. So it really would have stunk for them if they had just, the school would have opted out of the season. They wouldn't have even gotten to go out and have a chance to play. At least they have a chance to play.
Yeah. Well, why don't you fill us in a little bit about what's going on with the WPIAL playoffs?
Yeah, so the steering committee met this past week, had some lengthy discussions on what they were going to do, but they have not announced that yet. The WPIAL board is meeting this week, and the steering committee is supposed to make a presentation as far as how they're going to figure out the playoffs, I'll say. There's a couple different ideas out there. I don't really have any. There's really no insight. They're all being very tight-lipped about it right now as far as what they're going to do. It may come down to where they just have to act kind of like the NCAA tournament selection committee and just pick the teams that are going to make the playoffs.
It sure sounds that way, with the way that, I mean, literally, your 6A schools, I mean, they're just, wow, they're just not being able to play a full season out there.
Right. And especially where you have some schools that have played, 5 games now, and some that have only played 2. It's going to be really tough to separate those teams. And I feel really bad for a school like Gateway that had a positive COVID case, had to shut down for 2 weeks. We're supposed to come back and play Penn Trafford, who's the other top team in the Big East Conference in 5A. And then all of a sudden, Penn Trafford had a positive case this week and had to shut down. So Gateway lost 3 games in a row because of their case, and then the case of the opponent. The one thing I will say, though, I did kind of look through the list of games played, and up to this point, we've talked a lot about games that have been missed, but 94% of the scheduled games have been played. So that's a pretty good number considering where we were coming into this year. Granted, that 6% of games has impacted a fair number of teams, and more or less every conference.
It seems like they've impacted high-profile games.
I think so. I also think that it's one of those things where the bigger schools just sort of their numbers work against them, that there's a higher probability that someone at a bigger school is gonna get sick, that's worked against them, that there's been more big schools canceling games than small schools.
Right.
A lot of small schools have been able to play their full schedule. So there have been small schools that have canceled games too. Clareton canceled a game. We just talked about Sarah Catholic in 2A having to take 2 weeks off. So it's going to be interesting these last few weeks to kind of see where things go. But really, I was looking through the standings, and I can share my screen and get into that again like we did last week, that I think we're really getting down to a point where there's probably, even if you looked at sort of the teams that should be in the playoffs and the ones that might be on a quote unquote bubble, we're kind of down to 10 or so teams that if you're only going to take the top 8 after a few more weeks, you probably should be able to figure out which team should be in and which should be out,
I
with
think so.
very little discrepancy.
Yeah. Before we get into your screen sharing there, obviously Fort Cherry's win over Rochester was a big one for you. For me, the surprise was Central Catholic losing again. But
yeah,
what are some of the other ones there? Obviously, some of the noteworthy results from week 4.
Yeah, that Central Catholic game was a big result. They were up fairly sizable, I think like 17 points on Mount Lebanon, and Mount Lebanon came back and beat them 37-30 with a great passing performance from Joey Daniels. And it was really a win that Mount Lebanon needed to kind of get back into that playoff mix, because only 4 teams are going to make the playoffs in 6A, and Mount
Does
Lebanon
that
got upset
knock
by
Central
Cannon.
Catholic out?
No, it shouldn't knock Central out. Central's still in a pretty good spot, but Mount Lebanon had lost a game to Cannon McMillan earlier this year that really put their playoff hopes kind of in question. And now with this win over Central, it puts Mount Lebanon right back in the mix. I'd say Central is probably pretty safe given their other victories. They beat Cannon Mac, they beat Seneca Valley, who are other playoff contending teams. So I think Central should be pretty safe, even though they have 2 losses now. But that was definitely a surprise. Some other big games, Peters Township beat Moon on a Saturday game. That was noteworthy just because Moon had actually beaten Peters last year to win that conference title in the regular season. Peters came back and beat them in the playoffs in their run to the title game. But that was a team that had Peters Township's number, but Peters definitely looks like one of the top teams in 5A. Penn Hills edged out North Hills. They're in a conference with Pine Richland, who's easily the best team in 5A right now. So they're all fighting for second place, but that might be, the last playoff spot there. So Penn Hills getting that win over North Hills was noteworthy for the playoffs. Plum, whose head coach we interviewed last week, got a win over Hampton.
Good luck for him.
We were secured their spot. And we talked about that Aliquippa Chartiers Valley game, which was a big game and possibly one of the biggest statewide. And Aliquippa just did what Aliquippa does and took it to Chartiers Valley. It was 35-6. They had a 100-yard interception return for a touchdown, I believe. And Vernon Red ran all over him. It was a great performance from him. One noteworthy thing about that game, though, we've talked about Aliquippa being a single A size school playing up in 4A now because they were kind of forced up. Somebody posted a picture from the sideline before the game, and the whole Aliquippa team was there, and you could see Chartiers Valley's team in the background. And Aliquippa only had 35 players on their team, which for a 4A school is pretty small. But I mean, those kids just play their hearts out and they can play. That's just a great program and a great tradition that they've built there. And now they look like, they've got a clear path to the conference title. Big game against Montour this week, but Aliquippa is in a really good place to win that conference title and make a run at a 13th straight appearance in a WPIAL final, which is just an insane streak to even try and wrap your head around. In 3A, Central Valley just slaughtered Keystone Oaks. Central Valley is the best 3A team in the state. I mean, they're so good. Keystone Oaks had a dual threat quarterback that we talked about last week in Logan Shrub, who was a really good player. And Central Valley just killed them. I think it was like 63-20 or something. It was just, I mean, they're just head and shoulders better than all the other teams here. So I mean, they'll maybe get challenged by North Catholic in the playoffs if they have to face up, but I really don't see a WPIAL team that can slow Central Valley down. So I know there's a team out your way in Wyomissing that has designs on a state title as well, but we'll see if they get matched up somewhere along the line to sort that out.
Look, regionally, there are a lot of good teams. There's obviously favorites and whatever like that, but Central Valley is one that I'm keeping my eye on, as well as Pine Richland. I think that, Pine Richland in 5A, we've got one powerhouse team out here in Governor Mifflin in 5A that is really, a powerhouse program with a big Division I recruit. Nick Singleton on there. So it's going to be really interesting. So I think I set you up to where you can share your screen now.
Okay, hold on. Let me jump into that. The one other thing I was going to mention in 5A is I believe that Erie Cathedral Prep had to move up from 4A to 5A this year. So that's another potential contender there to keep an eye on. The one other game I wanted to mention is Jeanette against Springdale. And we had talked last week about how that was a real measuring stick game for Springdale and how they were trying to bounce back and see where their program was. And Springdale held a lead early in the game and was up at halftime, and Jeanette fought back in the second half, but it was a tight game all around, and Springdale really showed that they could, even though they lost, they could compete with the likes of Jeanette, and they get to play Clairton here in a few weeks. So that'll be a good one to keep an eye on. So we ran through some
it looks like I did that right, because there's your stuff all over the screen.
Yeah. So we ran through this a little bit last week, and as of right now, I'm still working under the assumption of how the WPIAL normally determines their standings, which is based on conference record, head-to-head results. The Gardner points, which is 10, it's a strength of victory metric, so you get 10 Gardner points for each victory of the team you defeated, and then the tiebreaker points, which is essentially margin of victory. So we talked about 6A. 4 of these 8 teams are going to make the playoffs. North Allegheny's well out in front, should cruise to the conference title. Their game against Seneca Valley earlier this year got canceled, so those 2 teams probably aren't even going to play. So I really think North Allegheny has an easy path to the regular season conference title there. And then in the middle, you've got these 3 teams in Central Catholic, Cannon-McMillan, and Mount Lebanon, who all have 2 losses. Now, head-to-head, Central Catholic beat Cannon-Mac beat Mount Lebanon beat Central, but there's still some sorting out to happen here. So Seneca Valley has a win over Cannon-McMillan. Seneca Valley and Mount Lebanon still have to play at some point. Baldwin got a win over Norwin, so these 3 teams at the bottom have all kind of beat each other as well, but Baldwin plays Seneca Valley this week, so that's one to keep an eye on, that if Baldwin wins that game, that really is going to throw things for a mess in the middle. If Seneca Valley wins that game.
We like that playoff chaos. We like that.
So if you're a team chaos, that'll probably be our 6A game of the week here.
Okay.
But if you like chaos, that's a result to root for. But it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of sorts itself out. There's been chaos before. We actually 2 years ago came down to a coin flip for a tiebreaker because 3 teams were all tied for the conference title, and only one of them could get a home playoff game. So they had to go to the WPIAL headquarters the morning of the playoff brackets being revealed and have a coin flip to determine who would get the playoffs, the home playoff game, because all the tiebreakers came out dead even.
I thought that they had to do that in fantasy football, not real football. But
no, it really happened. It was between West Green, California, and Monessen in the Tri-County South in Single A. And the crazy thing is, the way the WPIAL does it, like they all flip coins, and then whoever has the different result is the one who wins, I think, or loses, however it works. But they didn't actually get a different result until the 4th flip. So they went through 3 flips of coins where they all flipped heads or all flipped tails too. It was nuts. But yeah, those crazy kind of things happen every now and then.
Yeah.
Moving down to 5A. So there are 3 conferences in 5A, each with 6 teams. 8 teams total are going to make the playoffs. So probably assume the top 2 from each conference plus a couple third place teams. Peters Township's kind of running away with this one. They have wins over the top 3 teams here, Upper St. Clair, South Fayette, and Moon. So really don't see Peters slipping up at all. They're a powerhouse at this point, have a kid in Donovan McMillan. He's a safety going to Florida next year. So like we've talked about, anytime you have a player going to an SEC school, that's certainly noteworthy. Upper St. Clair is a really good team as well. South Fayette's been a really strong program, just moved up to 5A this year. So they're certainly in the mix as well. We'll see how this plays out over the next few weeks, but I fully expect Peters to be in the playoffs, and then probably one of Upper St. Clair, South Fayette, maybe both of them. Moon could still sneak their way in, but they've lost 2 games now in the conference, so that could get tough. They're going to have to pick up a victory here at some point. Right. So their game against Upper St. Clair is a big one this week. In the Big East, we talked about some missed games here. Gateway missed 2 games because of a positive COVID case there, and then Penn Trafford had one last week that caused their game against Gateway to be postponed, or I guess we should say canceled at this point because there's only a few weeks left in the season. So really the big game here is Gateway playing Woodland Hills this week. If Gateway wins, it's pretty certain that, considering Penn Trafford and Gateway would both have wins over Woodland Hills, that those will be, Penn Trafford and Gateway will be the top 2 teams in the conference. Woodland Hills, really good bounce back season for them after missing the playoffs last year. They could find their way into the playoffs, but it's going to kind of depend on how well they play this week against Gateway. They got it taken to them pretty good by Penn Trafford last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess. But so that's probably where that's going to wind up. I expect Penn Trafford and Gateway. And honestly, those teams are probably 2 of the top 10 5A teams in the state. Like, those are both really good teams, and just playing in the same conference. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see them play head-to-head this year, but they both should make the playoffs. They both deserve to be there. Talked about Pine Richland, arguably the best 5A team in the state. And, I'm not trying to just overinflate these WPIAL teams, but those top
I would
4
totally agree with you there.
Those top 4 programs between Pine Richland, Peters Township, Penn Trafford, and Gateway, I mean, they're just all absolutely loaded this season. And, if you held a statewide tournament, I would fully expect, 2, maybe 3 of them to wind up in the semifinals. And, it'll be interesting to see how the WPIAL playoffs play out, just because, how do you seed those teams? How do you organize them 1 through 4 and say, okay, we're going to stick you 2 in a potential semifinal matchup instead of a potential championship game matchup. Something the WPIAL has done in the past is they've usually tried to separate teams from the same conference on the playoff bracket. So if you're looking at, Pine Richland being, say, the number 1 seed, then you might have a Peters Township be 2, and then Gateway be 3, and Penn Trafford be 4, just to kind of split up that Gateway and Penn Trafford from being on the same side of the bracket. But we'll see how it all falls out, and hopefully by this time next week we'll have some more information about how they're even going to figure out, who makes the playoffs.
Well, clearly, if North Hills beats Pine Richland this week, then we've got more WPIAL chaos, right?
Yeah, we would. I honestly don't.
You don't think that's going to happen?
No, it's not going to happen. Pine Richland's just so good. I mean, they're killing everyone by a lot. I mean, look, they've almost scored 200 points in 4 games, so they're just smoking everyone. I'm really we didn't get to see Pine Richland play Gateway earlier this year, because that was one of those games that got canceled. But that would have been an absolute must-watch game. Down in 4A, Thomas Jefferson just keeps rolling right along. They're, absolutely reloaded from the team that won the state championship last year. They've won 20 games in a row. They face a Ringgold team that has trouble stopping anyone this year, so they should cruise to victory this week. Really, not a lot of close games in this conference this week. If you're looking for a potential upset special, McKeesport hasn't been as high scoring this year as they have been in years past, and Laurel Highlands has one of the best sophomores around in Rodney Gallagher. Laurel Highlands got shut out last week against Thomas Jefferson, but everyone gets shut out against Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
So that really wasn't a surprise. Bell Vernon, their only loss this year was to Thomas Jefferson, and noteworthy that Thomas Jefferson's actually the only team that scored against Bell Vernon. So those 42 points that Bell Vernon has given up were all against Thomas Jefferson, and they've shut out their other 4 opponents. So they're a really good
Thomas
team.
Jefferson only allowing 35 points so far.
Yeah, total. And most, I think 21 of those were to Bell Vernon. So, and there are other 3 games that have only given up 14 points. So they're both of those teams have just fantastic defenses and some really good offenses there. They met in the WPIAL championship game last year, and it's very possible that they meet there again this year. I would say, I really don't know how to judge Aliquippa against these 2 teams because I haven't seen them play, but I think Thomas Jefferson, Bell Vernon, and Aliquippa are the 3 best teams in 4A this year. So they'll probably get separated in the bracket that you'll have. I'm guessing Thomas Jefferson is the 1 seed, probably Aliquippa is the 2, maybe Bell Vernon is the 3, and then Plum is the 4 seed. But we'll see kind of how things get split up. The WPIAL has, I'll say, traditionally, if the defending WPIAL champion goes undefeated, they have traditionally given them the number 1 seed once again. It's rare that a defending champion goes undefeated and doesn't get the top seed in the playoffs the next year. So even if there are other teams that look better or perform better, it's just a traditional thing that they have done. So I fully expect Thomas Jefferson to be on top of that bracket in a couple of weeks. And Bell Vernon absolutely should make the playoffs again. McKeesport may be able to sneak their way in. 4A also has 3 conferences, and 8 teams will make the playoffs. So, 2 teams from one conference, 3 teams from the other 2 should get in. McKeesport's, I think, good enough to make the playoffs, but they got shut out They got shut out by Bell Vernon in week 1, and then play Thomas Jefferson next week in the season finale. So that'll be a good game. But I expect Thomas Jefferson to run away with that one. We talked about Plum earlier. We interviewed their head coach, Matt Morgan, last week, and they got a big win, 20-7 over Hampton this past weekend, and pretty much have a stranglehold on this conference because they have a head-to-head win over both Mars and Hampton, who are in 2nd and 3rd place. So the only team that's in the top half that they haven't played yet is Armstrong, but Mars and Hampton both beat Armstrong. So you would think that Plum should be able to handle them. Armstrong has a sophomore quarterback in Caden Olson who's having a great season, but I don't think they're as good as Plum is, especially Plum's defense has been excellent this season. So I think Plum should roll on to this conference title, and I expect Plum and Mars to both make the playoffs here. Hampton may be able to sneak in that 3rd spot, but we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. I'm kind of giving Hampton the benefit of the doubt considering they have wins over Armstrong and Highlands, who are the next 2 teams on the list. So, Hampton kind of has the edge there, but I'm not sure where they'll fall as far as how those 3rd place tiebreakers may work themselves out. And then the big game last week was Aliquippa beating Chartiers Valley. Aliquippa plays Montour this week, which Montour already lost to Chartiers Valley early in the season. So, that's a big game for Montour's playoff hopes if they're going to try and sneak in and cause some chaos. And there's some history between those 2 programs. They played a lot back in the 70s and 80s, so they haven't played each other much recently. Actually, they played some non-conference games the last 2 years, and Aliquippa won them both. So that was when Aliquippa was in 3A and Montour was in 4A, right. And Aliquippa still handled them. I expect Aliquippa to win and sort of cruise on to that conference title, but Montour's a good program and a good team this year that has won 4 in a row after losing that season opener to Chartiers Valley. So Montour is in the playoff conversation as well in 4A, as is Chartiers Valley, which is hanging strong right there in 2nd place. Moving down to 3A, my alma mater, North Catholic, got a big revenge victory this week. They beat South Park in a non-conference game, which was revenge for a playoff loss they suffered last year, which was an upset. North Catholic, I think, was the number 3 seed, and South Park was the number 6 seed, and South Park had a running back last year who just ran all over them in the playoffs. North beat them this year 28-2. So bit of revenge this past week made me feel good.
Is the postponement from East Allegheny at Derry, is that COVID related?
That is, yeah. Derry had a couple. I think it was a teacher that tested positive this week. So Derry postponed against East Allegheny. So East Allegheny is looking for a team to play. They've been really solid. Unfortunately here, the game between Freeport and East Allegheny last week got postponed because Freeport had a positive test, but they should be back in action this week. But East Allegheny lost to North Catholic, and Freeport still has to play North next week. So if North beats Freeport, there could be a real question as to who the second place team should be in this conference, because East Allegheny and Freeport may both only have one loss and not have played each other. And that could be a factor come playoff time for which team should not get in. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on as we move forward here. I should mention also the Burrell-Freeport game is a big rivalry game between those two schools. So that's one those schools, they've played for a number of years head-to-head against each other, and they always circle that one on their calendar, kind of regardless of how good or bad a team is. That's one
it's a winning season regardless of record, if whoever comes out on top, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Those are schools that are more or less right across the river from each other. So they just don't like each other. I had a bunch of friends growing up that went to Freeport, and they just did not like Burrell. It's so much that like they purposely just don't cross the river and do anything over on that side of the river just because they don't like Burrell that much, which, those deep-seated rivalries are always a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are always fun.
Probably the 3A game of the week here this week is between Mount Pleasant and Elizabeth Forward at the top of the Interstate Conference. Both of them haven't lost yet in conference play, and Mount Pleasant's only loss was a non-conference game that they played against a team from 4A. I think it was Trinity, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I should look that up. At any rate, Mount Pleasant lost the game to a team from a different classification, so we shouldn't hold that too much against them. And they're solid. Elizabeth Forward's solid. Elizabeth Forward has a really, really good defense and a defensive end in Chase Watton, who's going to make a decision on which D1 school he wants to go to this week. So that'll be exciting for him. One of the best players to come out of their program in a long time. So it'll be a good matchup at the top of the conference, and the winner pretty much will win the conference title. Mount Pleasant still has to play South Park, which Elizabeth Forward handled fairly well recently. The one surprise, though, Elizabeth Forward did get challenged a bit last week. They jumped out to a 14-0 lead over South Allegheny, and then South Allegheny came back in the second half and tied it at 14 and sent the game to overtime. And it took 2 overtimes for Elizabeth Forward to come out on top 20-14. So they did get challenged this week a little bit despite having that really good defense. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare against Mount Pleasant, who's had some success this year as well. The Northwest 6 Conference, we talked about Central Valley earlier and just how good they've been, averaging well over 50 points a game this season, only giving up about a touchdown per game. And Keystone Oaks has a win over Avonworth from a few weeks ago, so they're holding on to that second place spot for right now. Avonworth plays Hopewell this week in a game that'll more or less probably decide third place, because Keystone Oaks should be able to handle Hopewell. Hopewell, actually, shout out to them. They've had some struggles over the last few years, but got a mercy rule victory over Quaker Valley this week. They beat them 47-0. So over the last few years, Hopewell's been the team that got mercy ruled more often than not, but they came out on top this time around. So they're an up-and-coming program, but I still don't think they're as good as either Keystone Oaks or Avonworth. So I fully expect that to be Central Valley and Keystone Oaks as the top 2 teams coming out of this conference. Moving down to 2A, this is the conference that's been kind of the craziest in the Allegheny. We talked about Summit Academy not playing any games this year, so that kind of threw a wrench into the schedule.
Ligonier Valley moving in to try and get upgrade their competition, right?
Yep, and they may have gotten a little more than they asked for. They had some struggles. I mean, Apollo Ridge and Sarah Catholic are both really good teams. So if two teams from this conference make the playoffs, Apollo Ridge and Sarah Catholic absolutely deserve to be those two teams. They were supposed to play this week, but Sarah had that big COVID outbreak and pretty much came right out and said, we're taking the next 2 weeks off from everything. So hopefully Sarah is able to get back in time for the playoffs, because they were the highest scoring team in the WPIAL. Before last week, they were averaging well over 50 points a game. I think that Central Valley has reclaimed that crown after their big 63-point output against Keystone Oaks. But Sarah Catholic's been really good. Apollo Ridge has been really good, and they were supposed to play this week, and I was really looking forward to that game. But now they're not, and Apollo Ridge is looking for an opponent. So this conference has been a little weird. But those are definitely the top two teams there and should move on to the playoffs. 2A is a little easier to figure out because there's 4 conferences, so 8 teams making the playoffs out of 4 conferences should be the top 2 from each. So that should be who comes from there. In the Century Conference, Fraser has had some struggles in recent years, but edged Chartiers Houston this past week 7-6, which was actually the second 7-6 game this conference has seen this season. McGuffey beat Washington in week 1 7-6. So not a typical high school football score that you see in 2020, where there have been so many blowouts, so many high scoring teams, that you see a 7-6 game and you're kind of like, whoa, that was what happened there? That was a defensive struggle. And the way this conference is setting up, that McGuffey has wins over both Washington and Fraser, they really should cruise onto the conference championship here. McGuffey's only loss was to a team from West Virginia that they scheduled this past week because they had an opening on the schedule, and they should cruise on through here, and they're a team definitely to watch out for in the playoffs. Washington plays Fraser next week in what may amount to being a casket match, as I like to call it, which is basically term taken from 90s professional wrestling, where the winner moves on and the loser's dead. So it's essentially.
Do any of these teams realistically have a shot at Southern Columbia?
Beaver Falls might. Just getting to them, they've got a tandem of running backs in Josh Huff and Shalik Livingston, who are really, really good. Josh Huff is going to Syracuse next year, so I would say if any 2A team from the WPIAL has a shot at Southern Columbia, it's Beaver Falls. They've been really good this year. Just pounded Mohawk again this past week. Neshannock's the sort of team to watch in the middle here. They haven't played Beaver Falls yet, so they may. If Neshannock can get past New Brighton this week, who's a good middle of the pack team here, Neshannock will have a shot at winning the conference title against Beaver Falls in the final week of the season. But I think Beaver Falls moved down from 3A to 2A and probably could have competed in 3A this year with how good they are as a team. So if anyone has a shot at Southern Columbia, here. And then the biggest result from last week in 2A was Western Beaver beating Brentwood. For those that follow basketball, Western Beaver has a co-op agreement with Lincoln Park, who's one of the premier basketball schools, but they co-op for football. So they have a lot of additional athletes on their team as part of their co-op agreement. And that was a game that I had kind of circled before the season, as I had a really hard time picking who I thought was going to win this conference between Western Beaver and Brentwood. And Western Beaver beat Brentwood this week, and now is a big game against Stowe Rocks. And Stowe Rocks has only lost this season. Was a forfeit loss to Carleton that was not COVID related. They had some eligibility issues with some of their players that they didn't feel like they'd have enough to field a team, and that was a week 1 game. So, a week 1 academic eligibility issues, wow. Like sometimes that's just a weird thing where you took 1 6-point quit. You like, I'll fully admit there was a time in high school where I was failing a class, and that was because we took like 1 quiz that was 6 points and I got 2 of them wrong. So I got like 4 out of 6, and it was like, 1 week into the year, and I had to, 4 out of 6 on one quiz, and all of a sudden I was failing this class. I was like, well, this is this is dumb. And obviously I bounced back later in the year, but it's just one of those things where sometimes you have like one test or one quiz early in the year, and all of a sudden your grade drops, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? I need a chance to make up some points here. So, but Stowe Rocks has been really, really good in the 4 games that they've actually played. So they have a chance here the next 2 weeks playing against Brentwood and Western Beaver to actually usurp those top spots and get themselves into the playoffs. Moving down to 1A, here we see Fort Cherry. They're out of order here. That was my bad.
That's all right.
They should be up here ahead of Cornell. Actually, they should be here. They should be ahead of Union. But they have that game against Union this week. So apologies to the Fort Cherry folks that may still be watching that I have them in the wrong spot in the standings. I will fix that for next week. And by next week, they might be even higher with their game against Union. But they got that upset victory over Rochester, which puts Shenango out in front. Shenango plays against Ulsh this week and Rochester next week. So those 2 games will essentially decide the conference title here. But like Coach Gary mentioned, Shenango's a really good team this year, really good running back in Reese Watkins, who's really, really fun to watch, a great player. I think Shenango is the best team here. I think they'll run away with it. And Rochester could still get into the playoffs even with that loss to Fort Cherry because they have that head-to-head win over Ulsh. So that could carry them through into the postseason if the top 2 teams from this conference make it. In the Eastern Conference, Clairton is not only the best team in the WPIAL, they might be the best single A team in the state. They're really, really good. Jeanette gave them a run for their money in week 1 when they played, though. It was an 8-point game. So
I tell you what, I'd
Clairton,
stack up Steel High against those guys. Steel High out here in District 3, and
they've got a really good tradition.
Next week we'll definitely bring up the state rankings unless you have them ready. So
yeah, we can talk about them next week. And I think Jeanette actually might be the second best single A team in the WPIAL, just happened to be in a conference with Clairton. They've met in the WPIAL final a few times, so that very well could happen once again this season. Springdale, like I mentioned earlier last week, had that 8-point loss to Jeanette, but definitely showed they belong and they can compete. So they may be able to sneak their way into the playoffs as well. And then the 1A game of the week this week is California against Carmichael's, which is a Saturday game, but will be for the top spot in the Tri-County South. Avella, whose coach we interviewed the first week, got a win over Mapletown this week. So they have clinched their first winning season, I think, since 2014 with their 4th victory now. So congrats to Avella. They're hanging in there. They have a game against Carmichael's the last week of the season that could basically determine their playoff fate, provided they can get past Bentworth. Avella can get past Bentworth this week, but that Clairton Carmichael, or sorry, not Clairton, the California Carmichael's game this week will pretty much decide who wins this conference title. And that concludes our run through all of the current WPIAL standings. And hopefully by this time next week, like I said, we have some information on how the WPIAL is going to figure out which teams make the playoffs, whether it's going to be a formula of, top 2 and then a couple 3rd place teams, or if they're just going to pick the teams, or how it's all going to work itself out.
Yeah, I found that to be very interesting that they still haven't decided how, it's basically here. So it's going to be like after teams play their entire regular season, then they're going to let them know like who makes the postseason. So, but it is what it is. You've got some good games coming up this week. Quite honestly, looking at them, we got to see some of them there with your rundown there. But I'm really, like I said, I'm really interested in that North Hills Pine Richland game. What about you?
Yeah, I think Pine Richland's a much better team than North Hills is this year. North Hills has traditionally been kind of a middle of the pack team. Usually their typical year, I'll say, is, they're around 500. They make the playoffs. They lose in the first round. Has kind of been North Hill's MO for a long time. They haven't really had that breakthrough season. They've had a couple years where it looked like they might have a sort of different trajectory, but as the season wears on, just haven't quite been able to compete against some of the top teams. They had a really good team back in the early 2000s when I was in high school, but it's hard to believe that was almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah, funny how time flies, as did this, hour that we had here for our show. I mean, it was great, having Tanner, head coach there at Fort Cherry. I mean, what a great story that is. And, you bringing up the standings there to highlight all the good stories of not only, the conference races, trying to project WPIAL standings, but then, showing the matchups that are really going to affect those standings, in the next week. Good job, my man.
Thanks. Yeah, usually this time of the year, I'd be kind of figuring out, playoff clinching scenarios and who needs to win and lose and all that. But since we don't really know how they're going to figure it out, I haven't really dedicated a lot of time to that yet this year, just because we don't know. It's a completely different year. But, like we said, the great thing is teams are getting out there and playing. And really, we've been able to play a vast majority of the games, even though, we've had most conferences have had at least one team affected, but we've still been able to play. I think it was about 94% of our games. Generally speaking, there's 117 WPIAL teams. So if they all get out there and play, that's probably 58 or so games in a week. And we've been averaging around 55, 56 or so, give or take. Some other schools from outside the area have also scheduled games. We've had a couple games with WPIAL teams playing against City League opponents, or some teams from West Virginia or Maryland, or even Southside Beaver played against Union AC Valley this past week. So there's
do you see any of these teams,
some other.
Do you see any of these teams that are looking for games now being able to pick up games here the rest of the week?
They honestly, they might be able to, considering some of these cancellations came pretty early in the week, like Central Catholic, Hempfield had to cancel. So Central Catholic might be able to find someone. I know there's some 6A or larger programs that are looking for teams to play, especially with the Philly teams kind of coming back on board. I think St. Joe's Prep is playing LaSalle College this week.
Yeah.
So I guess we won't get a St. Joe's Prep Central Catholic game. I think Cathedral Prep up in Erie's playing against either Erie Central or McDowell this week.
I think most of the teams have games. I think, a couple 3 weeks ago, it might have been, I think it was a lot easier for teams to pick up a game because there were a lot of teams still with, holes in their schedule. But now, as we come down to the end here, these last, 3 weeks of the season, I think all of the teams have pretty much got everything, scheduled the way that they want to. And I think it's going to be very, very difficult for any of these teams to pick up a game, because there's going to be so much inflexibility and so much where the schools, want to get into some kind of structure down the stretch. What do you think about that?
I definitely think so. And I'll say that, we only have 2 weeks left in the formal regular season before we get into the playoffs. The PIAA did say that for teams that don't make the playoffs there, or even that get eliminated, they're allowed to kind of keep scheduling games up through Thanksgiving weekend. So you may have a lot of teams out there that just schedule games to try and get more games on the schedule and try and play them, which will be great to see. We could get some really fun matchups, get some, historic rivalries that get scheduled late in the year. I know some of those Philadelphia schools have a long tradition of playing Thanksgiving Day games against each other. So good that they'll potentially be able to get those back on the schedule and keep playing those. But we may be able to get some, some games or matchups we don't see very often. Maybe a Cathedral Prep against Central Catholic or something like that. That would be a fun matchup.
A couple years ago, they played A couple years ago, actually the year that Cathedral Prep won their last title, I think they opened up the season against one another, and Central Catholic kind of had their way with them. I don't know. I mean, it's like, how bad does each team want a game? Is really what it boils down to. If they've right now about this time of year, I think if schools have enough games under their belt, they're just going to kind of move on. And I don't blame them for doing that. I know that there was a lot of stuff going back and forth, on social media this week about teams just deciding not to play. They had their game canceled. Another team who didn't have a game calls them, and they said they don't want to play. And there was a lot of, for lack of a better word, vitriol out there about teams not willing to play certain teams across the state. But it is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think at some point you're right. Teams are going to want to just kind of be done. I think we may get, a handful of games here or there. I think the teams that could really benefit from an extra game or two are either teams that, had some games canceled during the year, teams that didn't make the playoffs but are trying to work on some fundamentals with some of their younger players, essentially treat them almost like scrimmages or, teams that have historically or struggling a little bit that want to get some more games under their belt, may be able to schedule games against teams from lower classifications. Like we were talking about Uniontown earlier, that they're in 4A and they've had so many struggles. Like Waynesburg's a 2A school that's like not right next door. I mean, but they're just in the next county over. It's not that far. But that would be a great matchup for those two to schedule this week, just because Uniontown's had so many struggles and Waynesburg is probably more on their level, being a 2A size school. Even though Uniontown's a 4A program, like their competitive level is probably a lot closer. So we may see some games like that where teams are able to schedule well outside their classification, but schedule against teams that they may be more competitive with and have more evenly matched games, just to try and get their kids some more experience out there, especially their underclassmen.
Yeah, it's it's a blessing and a curse to pick up to pick up these games late in the season like that. But anyway, Ian, another great show, just jam packed with, I mean, we're in overtime, baby. I mean, on this one, but it was very interesting talking with Coach there. I mean, it was like I said, it's mind-boggling to me to the lineage that the Gary family has there in Fort Cherry. Pretty incredible. So, any closing comments, my man?
No, I think it's great, kind of the stories we've been able to tell these first few weeks, from Avella to Plum to now Fort Cherry. So, hopefully we're able to continue to tell these great stories that may not, be as familiar even in the WPIAL or statewide. And hopefully people that are watching enjoy the show. And we've gotten some good comments and some good feedback so far. So thanks to the people that are watching and tuning in. And we'll see you all next week. And hopefully we'll have some information on how teams are going to get to the playoffs and who's going to make it. Because, only 2 weeks left in the regular season. So we're really getting down to it.
And you're right. I mean, let's thank the fans here that have really kind of embraced this show, starting to gain a following and what have you. For us, it's just it's an enormous amount of fun for me. The reason why I put this show together is the fact that I, as a football fan in Pennsylvania, want to become more engaged with what's going on in the WPIAL. And, for you too, getting to listen to all of your statistics, your passion for this game, your passion for the WPIAL is terrific. So I'm just glad that you bring me along for the ride every week.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm glad we get to talk high school football for an hour every week.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thanks to all the fans out there. We'll be back next week. Ian, I'm sure we'll come up with another fine guest. And next week, we'll definitely bring in the statewide rankings next week and kind of start, connecting the dots, because literally we're only a week or two away from postseason play beginning, it's kind of good to take a look down the road and see like who from the WPIAL might, run into, who are they going to run into, we think, up at Altoona. Or I'm not saying that that's where it is, but typically we're in Altoona or Somerset, like with WPIAL versus District 3 teams, right?
Usually that's how it winds up. Yep.
Yeah. So listen. All right. Well, listen, fans, thank you very much. For Ian, I'm Badge. We will see you next week. So long, everybody.